Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 107. In our episode today, we will cover a short story that is part of a larger collection, paired with two other stories, that have contributed to this now forgotten author's extensive legacy. This writer had a long life, almost 100 years, and it was productive despite her troubling personal and professional circumstances. At the age of 25, she committed to the vagaries and the ins and outs of a literary life and almost died in Denver during the 1918 flu pandemic. This writer, like many modernist female authors of the early to middle 20th century, worked her way up through the medium of the short story, and she successfully leveraged that medium to gain a modicum of fortune and a maximum of pain. Today, we will cover the epic short story of flu, memory, love, loss, and death, and a story that serves as a bookend to the exegesis we are currently experiencing in the West around our response to the very most recent pandemic, or plandemic, depending upon your perspective, of this current century. Today, we will be summarizing and analyzing the main themes for leaders embedded in Pale Horse, Pale Rider by Katherine Ann Porter. Leaders, we are now only 4 years into that long 10-year reckoning about COVID and our collective global response to it. Gird your loins and prepare to act like men if you haven't been doing so already. And so we open today with summarizing from Pale Horse, Pale Rider by Katherine Ann Porter. Now, this book is still in copyright, and so today what we are going to be doing is we are not going to be reading specific selections from the book. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to summarize the main action of certain elements of the book or of the story. And when we summarize these pieces of action, we'll be talking about what's happening, and then we'll move directly from there into some analysis of what all of this action actually means. Now, the book opens, or the story opens, and by the way, it is a short story. It's only around 70 or so pages, and its pacing and its movement is very helpful for an individual with a short attention span, right? So, if you could read 70 pages, you can get really the themes that are underlying in this story by Katherine Ann Porter. So we open up with Pale Horse, Pale Rider, where the main character, a woman named Miranda, is sleeping, and she's in a dream where she knows she is in her bed, and she's deep in sleep, but she's getting ready to come out of it. And so she's in this weird in-between dream space, which I have been in and you have been in, and most anybody who's ever been asleep, which is everybody that you know, has been in. And she's riding a horse, right? And this horse that she's riding, called Grayley, is trying to outrun death and the devil. And it turns out that a stranger is on a horse right next to her. And of course, the stranger has the blank, still stare of mindless malice that makes no threats and can bide its time. Miranda realizes that this stranger is death. Now, she doesn't get to the end of the dream. The dream doesn't close in the first opening moments of Pale Horse, Pale Rider. Instead, Miranda draws herself out of sleep, and she, of course, has her thoughts as they come out of sleep dominated by the war. Now, we find out later that it's World War I, and this is an important piece to understand the entire rest of the book because, or the entire rest of the story, because Miranda's lover is in World War I. We'll meet him a little bit later on. And the early action, the early ways in which Miranda is shaped are through the lens of World War I. As a matter of fact, when she wakes up, she is trying to determine how she's going to continue to exist and how she's going to continue to live on her job as a journalist, making $18 a week, and how she is going to avoid purchasing or avoid being hassled to purchase Liberty bonds. What most people don't know in the modern era is that Liberty bonds were similar to a tax. So instead of printing money back in the day, what the government would do, and this was process started in World War I and really kicked off in World War II. And you had some of it in Vietnam, but by then we were printing money left and right. What the government would do is they would go to individuals, they would have them buy bonds in order to support the war effort. And they would send out salesmen. And Miranda, when she eventually wakes up, gets herself together, gets herself to work, sees two men sitting on her desk, a younger man and an older man. And this younger man and this older man basically try to convince her or try to connive her into, or try to socially pressure her, actually, into purchasing Liberty bonds with money that she does not have. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about this in the analysis, but for right now, we're just doing the summary. And she stares at the two men, and Miranda takes their measure and finds them to be wanting. By the way, the first opening paragraphs of Pale Horse, Pale Rider put you in mind of a Cormac McCarthy novel, right? Or they put you in mind of the movie from 2008 that starred Tommy Lee Jones and a couple of other actors that I can't currently remember the names of, called No Country for Old Men. Josh Brolin was the other actor in that film. And I'm going to make some references back to No Country for Old Men. I'm going to make some references back to Cormac McCarthy. But these opening pieces where Miranda is a woman, she's a journalist, she's struggling to make ends meet, and she doesn't want to be socially pressured into buying Liberty bonds, have a lot of, it creates a lot of echoes moving forward into our own year right now, where we live in a post-COVID, socially pressured environment as well. All right, so let's start off here with understanding a little bit about Katherine Ann Porter and the literary life of Katherine Ann Porter. So she was born on May 15th, 1890, and died September 18th, 1980. So she lived 90 years. She had a long life. And she was an American journalist, just like her character Miranda in Pale Horse, Pale Rider, an essayist, a short story writer, a novelist, a poet, a left-wing political activist, and on-again, off-again Roman Catholic. By the way, that's important later on for understanding some of her other writings. She was born in Indian Creek, Texas, as Callie Russell Porter to Harrison Boone Porter and Mary Alice Jones Porter. Now, she changed her name to match that of her grandmother's when her mother passed away, and her father took his 4 children to live with his mother, her grandmother, in Kyle, Texas. Now, because of all the moving around that Katherine Ann Porter did when she was a kid and the kind of upset life that she existed in as a child, she was enthusiastic, deeply enthusiastic about her own personal genealogy and family history. As a matter of fact, she would have been one of those 23andMe people probably if she were alive in the current era of genetic testing and genealogy. And she spent years constructing a quasi-official version of her ancestry, alleging descent from a companion of William the Conqueror, all the way to alleging that somehow her family was connected to President Lyndon B. Johnson. As I said before, Katherine Ann Porter's mother died when she was 2 years old, and as a result of that death and the move to Kyle, Texas, to live with her grandmother, her father's mother, Katherine was deeply influenced by the nature and the desolation of South Central Texas, right along the watershed of the Brazos River in the early 20th century. People forget just how wild the land of Texas and many other places in the West was in the early 20th century, and how wild it remains today. Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Austin, even places like Midland, Odessa. These were still cow towns well into the 1950s and even the 1960s. At the age of 16, I guess, in an attempt to get out of not only Kyle, but also the other places that her father, who was an intrepid fellow, had them moving around between Texas and Louisiana in order to, I guess, get some solidity in her life and get away from all that moving around. Katherine, at the age of 16, got married. And by the way, this would start a long trend of her being in relationships with men, those intimate relationships then falling apart, and then her having to move on. By the age of 25, she was divorced. And also at the age of 25, she was diagnosed with tuberculosis. At the age of 27, she started her writing career. She actually intentionally committed to writing. And also at the age of 27, because of her tuberculosis diagnosis, she almost died in the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, an epidemic that took off more people worldwide, globally, than all the people who died in the trenches of World War I. Porter began her writing career first in Denver, and then she continued to traipse throughout the American West. She even went down to Mexico, where she met the painter and communist revolutionary Diego Rivera and became involved with left-wing politics, as most people did in the 1920s and 1930s. It was very popular to be a communist back then. And she also spent some time in New York City. But Katherine Ann Porter was deeply influenced by the West, deeply influenced by Western thinking and Western behavior, And she was a Western woman writer, which means she wasn't Virginia Woolf. And she sure as heck wasn't Isak Dinesen. She wasn't an aristocrat, nor was she a wealthy woman with aristocratic leanings or tendencies. Katherine Ann Porter was salt of the earth, and she took the salt and took the earth and used it to make something, to make a literary voice, to create a literary legacy that was uniquely hers. So back to the book, back to the story, back to Pale Horse, Pale Rider. So we pick up the book right around the moment where Miranda is trying to figure out, well, she's having a conversation with a couple of folks in the newsroom, and talking about how Miranda and another female journalist, a woman named Towney, had a great deal in common. They were considered, as she says, to have been real reporters once, but because they had behaved badly around reporting a story, according to the editor of the newsroom, they had been degraded publicly to routine female jobs, one to the theaters and the other to the society pages. By the way, a lot of female reporters cut their eye teeth on theater and on society. And this is going to come up a little bit later on, because one of the guys actually in the newsroom is a little bit better at reporting on the theater than Miranda is. Now, as she's going through this process of trying to orient her brain around these new assignments and trying to figure out where she fits as a journalist in the newsroom, she begins to think on her boyfriend, I guess would be the term, the modern day term, although that's not how he is referred to in here. Her lover, I guess, is another term that would have been used, an older term. A gentleman named Adam. Now, Adam is never given a last name, okay? And he's a soldier from Texas who is self-conscious about his wristwatch, right? He thinks a wristwatch makes him effete, right? It makes him less of a man, but the Army gave him one, and so he wears it. She remembers on him taking her dancing, and she has memories and understandings of them walking the town and hanging out together. She talks a little bit, Miranda does, or reflects a little bit on how he was 24 years old and a second lieutenant in an engineer corps and was expecting to go to Europe very soon. Miranda judges Adam, and she judges his commitment to the U.S. military, to the engineer corps, to going to Europe. And she judges him through a lens of wanting him to stay and be with her versus going to the war. And she realizes, Miranda does, that Adam is good and duty-bound and has motivations that are opaque to her and are unknowable. And they're opaque to her and unknowable because he is eager to do his job and go to the trenches in Europe. Now, the social pressure of working in the newsroom with the other journalists, as well as the social pressure for refusing to purchase Liberty bonds, is also explored in this part of the book. And the way that this story is written, not book story, the way the story Pale Horse, Pale Rider is written, there's no delineation between past and present. There's no delineation between things that have occurred that are in Miranda's memory and things that are occurring now. The overlaps of things, the overlaps of events, the overlaps of memories are occurring in a stream of conscience in Miranda's mind. And This, of course, matches how Katherine Ann Porter wrote, how she perceived her place in the world. She even wrote for radio dramas like NBC University Theater, and she made appearances on radio series giving critical commentary on works by folks like Rebecca West and her contemporary Virginia Woolf. And occasionally she appeared on television in the 50s and 60s. So she understood the nature of flow of time and of flow in a literary context. By the way, Katherine Ann Porter was also an elected member of the National Institute of Arts and Letters, and she was a writer in residence at several colleges and universities, including the University of Chicago, the University of Michigan, and the University of Virginia. And she was nominated for the Nobel Prize for Literature many, many times. And she never actually won it, right? Instead, she won the Pulitzer Prize in 1966 for her book Ship of Fools, which is really, really interesting. By the way, this literary / cinematic way of, or dreamlike way of writing matches what's happening in Pale Horse, Pale Rider, because of course it opens with a dream. I want to pick up here from the book of Revelations as we consider Pale Horse, Pale Rider. The title comes from the book of Revelations, specifically Revelation 6, 1 through 8. And I quote directly from the King James Version. And I saw when the Lamb opened up one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder, one of the four beasts saying, "Come and see." And I saw, and behold, a white horse. And he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, "Come and see." And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and they that should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, "Come and see." And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, "A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, "Come and see." And I saw, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat upon him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. Close quote. The headlines of our current year, the year of our Lord, 2024, are filled with calls for mea culpas, frantic calls, actually, for mea culpas, and forgiveness for the actions of leaders from Andrew Cuomo all the way to Dr. Anthony Fauci, who made poor and in many cases deadly decisions that led to many preventable deaths during the years 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and potentially even now in 2024. We still have people walking around with masks on. And we still have people who are haunted by the specter of death from the COVID vaccine or shot, depending upon your perspective. And we're not allowed to talk about it. We're not allowed to have a cultural sort of moment about this. We're not allowed to push out all of the anger and the fear and the feelings of deception that those who took the shot and those who did not currently have. Now, of course, you can say that we actually are having this cultural vomiting going on because we can't shut up about it. We can't stop talking about it. And I might be willing to accept that idea. kind of like the idea that we don't talk enough about racism in America when we just can't shut the hell up about it. And average people during our time want to just move forward. They want to move forward from thinking about the impact of decisions that led to lockdowns and the controversies around the COVID shot and the deaths that are coming as a result of it and the political wrangling. They welcome calls, the average people do, from the Atlantic to the New York Times, from the Washington Post to Rolling Stone, for forgiveness and for forgetting. Katherine Ann Porter's book, Pale Horse, Pale Rider, and the Book of Revelations there, well, they both hearken to the same thing. This idea that plague sweeps the country and brings death with it. And yet we live in a postmodern era, right? Where we're too sophisticated for religion, where we don't believe in pale horses riding across the countryside. We don't believe in the metaphorical, spiritual war that perhaps was actually going on at 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 levels above our material consciousness. And we, of course, don't believe that forgiveness as a spiritual act is enough justice during a time when little justice seemed to be handed out. The more Patrick Henry-oriented types in our country, mostly online, I'm beginning to really believe, are uninterested in such rapprochement with the people and the institutions and the systems and the structures who they believe behaved tyrannically, almost to the point of putting people in camps, attempting to force them to bow to, at the minimum, social and legal pressure, kind of the way that Miranda was being forced through social pressure to bow to buying Liberty bonds, even though she was dead broke. What's the lesson for leaders here? What is the value that I can get out of saying some of the controversial things that I've just said right now? And by the way, I'm going on record with all these things, and it's fine. Because these are the facts on the ground. These are the things that we are seeing. You do have a group of people in this country who do not want rapprochement. They want justice. And you have a group of people in this country, led mostly by mainstream media folks, who just want it all to go away and just want us to forget and go back to the pre-COVID slumber of chasing around a bad orange man. Leaders, for their part, leaders at all levels, leaders in small businesses, medium-sized businesses, civic organizations, families, neighborhoods, the places where real leadership happens. I'm not talking to folks, even though they may be listening to me in the corporate or the governmental structures. I'm talking about leaders actually on the ground in America where real things happen. Those leaders need to decide which side of this debate they're on. And there really are only two sides. There is no third way. There is no happy middle. There is no gray area. And if that reveals a lack of sophisticated thinking, well, let's just ask Katherine Ann Porter what she would think about this. By the way, as a result of her contracting Spanish flu in 1918 and almost dying in Denver, Colorado, she went bald. And when her hair grew back, it was white for the rest of her life. That says something, right? You could have all the rapprochement and forgiveness and mea culpas that you want in the popular culture, but there is a consequence. And this is fundamentally what leaders have to remember. There are consequences for everything you do, and there are consequences for everything you don't do. And you have to be willing and able to accept those consequences without making some squirrely appeals to be forgiven so that you can get out of consequences that should be justly coming to you. By the way, I'm looking directly at you, Andrew Cuomo. Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us, that's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show. Back to Katherine Ann Porter, back to Pale Horse, Pale Rider. So we pick up with Miranda and Adam in the last few moments that they have together before Adam heads off overseas to Europe. And they go to a play, and they stay for all three of the acts. And Miranda reveals something about her nihilism, right, in the face of, this is not the word she uses, but it is, her nihilism in the face of the atrocities that are allegedly being committed in the war, in particular during the way that they are described in the play. Now, Adam, on the other hand, is, as she portrays him, a sacrificial lamb. He has strong morals. He's not worried about the worst of the war. He's worried about going and doing his duty. And so they go to see the show, and she smells him and engages with him and touches him. And it's a very physical piece of the book, right? Describing Miranda's relationship to Adam. And in essence, during the course of them hanging out, during the course of them walking around through the town and experiencing each other, Miranda gets a split-second view of Adam, what he would have been like when he was older, the face of the man he would not live to be. And this is where you begin to get the idea that Adam isn't going to make it, and that these memories that Miranda, or that these incidents that Miranda is writing about, are not indeed happening. They are memories of hers. Now, during the course of them watching the play, the signs of flu begin to pop up in Miranda, but she doesn't recognize them as being sick. And because she doesn't recognize them as being sick, by the time the flu overcomes her, she is in her apartment, and she has slept all through the day. And the doctor came, tapped on her chest, and then left, and left and sent back for an ambulance. Now, Adam comes back to her during the course of this time, and he has been off to training camp to get some inoculations. And the inoculations and the methods of giving those inoculations somewhat indicate in the book, in the story, because it's almost like a movie, but indicate in the book that there is something else that's happening with Adam, and that this protection is not coming soon or fast enough. Now, eventually, Miranda and her landlady, Miss Hobie, eventually have to come to a parting, right? And Adam basically tells her that, he's not going to allow her to put Miranda out on the sidewalk. He's going to indeed take care of her. The ambulance is coming in the morning. He'll be gone, and that there aren't any beds that are available immediately, and that the plague that Miranda is carrying, and that word is used in this section of Pale Horse, Pale Rider, the plague that she is carrying, is going to have to stay in that house. While all this is going on, Miranda hallucinates, moving in and out of time and mixing her memories of Adam with her desires to be in love and her experiences increasingly when she gets to the hospital and actually gets to a bed of being poked at and prodded by hospital staff. One of the interesting things that occurs during the description of the Spanish influenza, of the Spanish flu, by the way, what we now call the common cold, just so that you know that. These descriptions that Katherine Ann Porter employs, she doesn't really talk about the devastation of the actual flu itself. Instead, she talks about the remedies that were given in order to counteract it. Hot tea and hot drinks, lozenges and other pills. But there were very few tools, even the inoculations, that would work against this flu. And the hospital beds fill up and fill up and fill up. And the pale specter of death haunts the countryside. So when I look at Katherine Ann Porter, when I look at Pale Horse, Pale Rider, I'm reminded of how death is undefeated, right? A comedian said that one time. Death is number one. It's never been defeated. On a long enough timeline, I believe this is a line from Fight Club as well, on a long enough timeline, everybody's survival rate drops to 0. In reading Pale Horse, Pale Rider, I'm also reminded at an analysis level of the movie No Country for Old Men. I know I initially said 2008. It's actually looked it up. It's 2007. And Tommy Lee Jones, the great Tommy Lee Jones in there, portraying Sheriff Ed Tom Bell in West Texas. When he opens up the film, he says some of these immortal lines, and I quote, "I was the sheriff of this county when I was 25 years old. Hard to believe. My grandfather was a lawman, father too. Me and him were sheriffs at that same time, him up in Plano and me out here. I think he's pretty proud of that. I know I was. Some of the old-time sheriffs never even wore a gun. A lot of folks find that hard to believe. Jim Scarborough never carried one. That's the younger Jim. Gaston Boykins wouldn't wear one up in Comanche County. I always like to hear about the old-timers. Never missed a chance to do so. You can't help but compare yourself against the old-timers. Can't help but wonder how they would have operated in these times." There was this boy I sent to electric chair at Huntsville Hill here a while back. My arrest and my testimony, he killed a 14-year-old girl. Paper said it was a crime of passion, but he told me there wasn't any passion in it. Told me that he'd been planning to kill somebody for about as long as he could remember. Says if they turned him out, he'd do it again. Said he knew he was going to hell. Be there about 15 minutes. I don't know what to make of that. I sure don't. The crime you see now, it's hard to even take its measure. It's not that I'm afraid of it. I always knew you had to be willing to die to even do this job. But I don't want to push my chips forward and go out and meet something I don't understand. A man would have to put his soul at hazard. He'd have to say, okay, I'll be part of this world. Close quote. Katherine Ann Porter put her soul at hazard, right? As a survivor of both tuberculosis and the Spanish flu. And she was positioned to write in a way that leaders can understand. She wrote about the truth of things as she saw them and as she experienced them directly. And while Porter was not a big believer in religion because she was a leftist who eventually came back to Catholicism after she rejected it as a young woman. As an old woman, she came back, and in the last 10 years of her life, she was a devout Catholic. It took her a while to kind of make peace with the world, make peace with the existential horror and evil and death that she had seen up close. Katherine Ann Porter is a writer for our postmodern time, even though we don't read her much anymore. And she's not the only modernist writer from the mid-20th century, because modernism and nihilism go together in the mid-20th century American novel. And those writings by women, from Isak Dinesen, as I already mentioned, to Porter, to Zora Neale Thurston, who we're going to cover on this podcast fairly soon, to even Joan Didion and Virginia Woolf, who we've already covered, carry the same existential weight of unmarked discovery that characterized the writings of their male counterparts, like Hemingway, Dos Passos, Richard Wright, and of course, James Baldwin. These writers are trying to put to words, trying to put to a spiritual understanding material evil that they see happening all around them, whether that evil comes in the form of plague and epidemic, or when that evil comes in the form of trench warfare or the gulags and the concentration camps of World War II. Trying to give words to that without falling into nihilism or existential dread is the role of the writer. And unfortunately, in our time, with our short attention span audiences and our TikTok limitations, we don't have enough space to breathe out all of the frustrations, all the anger, all of the dread, all the fear. It does still come out of us, but it comes out of us in 60-second drips. Now, of course, no one raindrop blames itself for the flood, but you get enough of the raindrops together, as we are seeing, I think, with social media and the internet in our era, and you get a flood of dread. Unfortunately, there's no more gatekeepers, as I mentioned with Isak Dinesen. There's no more gatekeepers. There's no people to direct the flood. And so the water crashes, the water of existential dread in the face of unremediating evil crashes and erodes and pushes through our consciousness, and we have no defense against it. When something like October 7th happens in Israel, or the Ukraine war shows up, or there are riots in America, we have no defense. And that was the role of the writer. That's the role of the gatekeeper. That's the role of the cultural artist, is to provide a direction for the existential dread and a focus for it, not only so that we can all let off steam, but so that we can all wrap our arms around some kind of understanding of what exactly the hell is happening. Hollywood has abandoned us, and TikTok won't serve us. So, leaders, who will carry the boats? Who will carry the logs? Who will be willing to die, metaphorically, emotionally, and psychologically, to do the job of leadership in an era where they are going out to meet a raging flood of existential dread that they may not be able to fully comprehend? Back to Katherine Ann Porter, back to Pale Horse, Pale Rider. We're turning the corner here, and in the book, we turn the corner as well. Before Adam goes off to Europe, he visits her, or not visits her, but he talks with her in her apartment before the ambulance arrives, in order to take her to the hospital. And he tries to make her as comfortable as he possibly can. He talks about how he is or was going to be an electrical engineer, and they talk about the differences between being Methodists and Presbyterians, they light a cigarette and they sing an old Negro spiritual, "Pale horse, pale rider, done taken my lover away." Now, of course, this is in reference to the flu. It's in reference to the dream that occurs at the beginning of the short story. And Miranda sings about death. Miranda gets taken to the hospital, and she meets a doctor named Dr. Hildesheim. And she tells Adam goodbye and says that she's going to see him again, but she won't. Matter of fact, the two interns from the county hospital who have arrived to take her to her bed don't even know who or where Adam is. There's a lot of pain in the last part of Pale Horse, Pale Rider as Miranda goes through the fog, just like she did at the beginning of the story, but this time it's the fog of illness, not the fog of death, because she decides that she's not going to walk down this road. She's not going to die. Miss Tanner, the nurse, begins to take credit, and Dr. Hildesheim, of course, takes credit, but Miranda knows that she has pulled herself out of death, pulls herself out of the clutches of the Grim Reaper. The pale horse rides past her, along with its pale rider. Melanie is then released from the hospital, and her job, which was held for her by her coworkers, is open again, and they are eager for her to spin journalistic gold out of the dross of sickness and near death. When Miranda recovers, armistice is declared and that the war is over. But her journalistic pals tell her that, that she's got a stack of letters that she needs to look at. And inside of one of those letters in that stack, in unfamiliar handwriting, is a letter from a stranger at the camp where Adam had been, telling her that Adam had died of influenza in the camp hospital. And that's all she gets as a denouement on Adam's life. Miranda just barely survives the flu, right? And commits to putting away her feelings about the loss of Adam, the sickness that she has just gone through, the brush with death she just experienced, and even her love affair, in order to ensure that the people she works with and other people in society and culture are comfortable being in her presence, so that she can continue to play the game of life by rules already set for her. This decision to continue to play that game and continue to play in a way that allows other people to be comfortable closes out Pale Horse, Pale Rider. The game of life and continuing to win. That's what Miranda wanted to do there at the end of Pale Horse, Pale Rider. And we deliver on our promise here on this podcast this year by talking about, in real ways, talking about solutions to problems, solutions to seemingly unsolvable problems. Most problems do have solutions, right? And the challenge of our current era, particularly around what happened with COVID and kind of the sort of mea culpa attitude that, or at least mea culpa requests and the forgiveness attitude that's now beginning to pop up in mainstream culture, is one that defies regular understanding. And so we have to look at books like Pale Horse, Pale Rider that were written by people who survived the last genuine pandemic in America and worldwide for direction, for which way to go. Which game are we going to continue to play? Are we going to continue to play the game of life, or are we going to play a game of death? Are we going to play a game of blame, or are we going to play a game of consequences? By the way, blame and consequences are not the same thing. Which way will we go, American man and woman? Will we go towards commissions and accountability with consequences, or towards cultural shrugging, lukewarm commitments to quote-unquote change over time, and cynical appeals to the short attention span of a distracted majority? You know, all those folks who just wanted to go back to being the way that it was before. As I've already said, writers, movie makers, cultural gatekeepers, individuals like Katherine and Porter, who would probably claim to carry her weight in our current era, they do carry the weight in our current era of responsibility to maintain the commitment to establishing and policing the boundaries of what I believe is a necessary reckoning. Culture does this reckoning better than politics. I don't want a political reckoning. I don't want people to go to jail. I don't want people locked up for legal consequences. I want people shunned from society. I want us to be able culturally and socially to do to folks who promoted nonsense during COVID and who refused to accept the consequences of that, to experience the consequences of, or similar consequences to those that are experienced by people who smoke in our society. We have successfully pushed smokers to the edges of polite society, even with the vaping and everything else. We've pushed them to the edges of polite society, and all with very little governmental intervention. Isn't that kind of amazing? If we wanted to socially norm people around cigarettes, and if we wanted to socially norm people, well, we wanted to socially norm people around cigarettes, and so we socially normed folks. Now, did we change laws to reflect where people could smoke and where they couldn't? Yes, absolutely we did that. But here's the thing that most people don't really understand. The laws came about after society changed, not before. See, society and culture change first. Gatekeepers are people, and they make changes first. And then the law is always late to the table. It's always late to the game. It's always last at the party. If we want to deliver a generational reckoning on COVID, the culture has to change first. And then there will be investigations. And then maybe there will be some consequences. Are we going to put on our quote-unquote face as leaders in this era and pretend that all these things didn't happen? Or are we going to determine critically how the wound that was delivered to us, how the damage that was delivered to us, are we going to determine critically how that wound heals? Katherine Ann Porter's life and her writing provide a way out for cultural gatekeepers to be able to talk about this in concert with leaders who will find a way forward culturally and socially to get us to the reckoning and through the reckoning that we need to have, so that we can get through to the other side and actually have learned something from this entire friggin' experience, so we don't repeat it again. Or at least, not anytime soon. And well, that's it for me. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.